Now, so far I have explained how the institution of a state leads to war. Why, seemingly paradoxical, internally liberal states tend to be imperialist powers, and how the spirit of democracy has contributed to the decivilization in the conduct of war. More specifically, I have explained the rise of the United States to the rank of the world's foremost imperial power, and as a consequence of its transformation, the transformation of the United States from the beginnings as an aristocratic republic into a mass democracy, the role of the United States as an increasingly arrogant warmonger. Now, what appears to be standing in the way of peace and civilization then is above all the state and democracy, and specifically, of course, the world's model democracy, the United States. But ironically, if not surprisingly, it is precisely the United States which claims that it is the solution to the quest for peace. The reason for this claim is the so-called doctrine of democratic peace, which goes back to the days of Woodrow Wilson and World War I and has been revived in recent years by George Bush and his neoconservative advisors. Now, this theory of democratic peace claims the following. First, democracies do not go to war against each other. Second, hence, in order to create lasting peace, the entire world must be made democratic. And as a largely unstated corollary, 3, today many states are not democratic and resist internal democratic reform. And 4, hence, war must be waged on those states in order to convert them to democracy and thus create lasting peace. Now, I do not have the patience for a full critique of this theory, but I shall provide a brief critique, at least of the theory's premise and of its final conclusion. First thing, do democracies not go to war against each other? Now, since almost no democracies existed before the 20th century, the answer must obviously be found within the last 100 years or so. And in fact, the bulk of the evidence that is offered in favor of this thesis is that the countries of Western Europe have not gone to war against each other in the post-World War II era. Likewise, in the Pacific region, Japan and South Korea have not warred against each other. Now, does this evidence prove the case? Now, the democratic peace theorists obviously think so. As they see it, there are plenty of cases on which they can build their case. Germany did not war against France, Italy, and England. France did not war against Spain, Italy, and Belgium. And moreover, there are permutations involved also. Germany did not attack France, and France did not attack Germany. Thus, we have seemingly dozens of confirmations, and not a single counterexample for more than 60 years. But do we really have that? And the answer is, of course, no. What we actually have is no more than one single case. With the end of World War II, all of Western Europe and Japan and Korea in the Pacific region became part of the United States empire, as is indicated by the presence of United States troops practically everywhere in these countries. Now, what the post-World War II period of peace then proves is not that democracies do not go to war against each other, but that an imperialist power such as the United States did not let its various colonial parts go to war against each other. You also did not see, by the way, any wars breaking out between all those countries that were dominated by the Soviet Union as long as the Soviet Empire existed, from which we also do not draw the conclusion that communist dictatorships under Russian control do not go to war against each other. So because of that, we have to introduce something like this. So then, second point is, what about democracy as a solution to anything? First point, the theory involves a conceptual conflation of democracy and liberty or freedom that one can only call scandalous. The foundation of liberty is private property, and private or exclusive property is incompatible with democracy, which is nothing else but majority rule. Democracy is a soft variant of communism, and rarely in the history of ideas has it been taken for anything else but this, except, of course, Mr. Bush. Second, the theory of democratic peace distinguishes only between democracy and non-democracy, which it all summarily labels as dictatorships. Everything that is not a democracy is a dictatorship for them. Thus, not only disappear all aristocratic republican regimes from its view, but also all traditional monarchies. They all are equated with dictatorships a la Lenin, Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. In fact, however, traditional monarchies have little in common with dictatorships. Monarchies are the semi-organic outgrowths of hierarchically structured, natural, stateless societies. Kings are the heads of extended families, tribes, and nations. They command a great deal of voluntarily acknowledged authority which was accumulated over many generations. And it is within the framework of such orders that liberalism, in the European sense, first developed and flourished. And in contrast, democracies are egalitarian in outlook. Characteristically, the transition from the monarchical age to the democratic age, beginning in the second half of the 19th century, has seen the steady decline of liberal parties, again in the European sense of the term liberal, and a corresponding strengthening of socialists of all stripes. Democracy and socialism go hand in hand. Third, it follows from this that the view democratic peace theorists have of conflagrations such as World War I must be considered to be grotesque. For them, World War I was essentially a war of democracy against dictatorship, and hence it was progressive, peace-enhancing, and ultimately a justified war. In fact, however, matters are very, very different. To be sure, pre-war Germany, pre-World War I Germany and Austria may not have been as democratic as England or the United States. But Germany and Austria were not dictatorships, but increasingly emasculated monarchies, and as such arguably as liberal, if not more so, than their counterparts, the United States and England. For instance, in the United States, anti-war proponents were jailed. The German language was essentially outlawed, and citizens of German descent were harassed. Nothing comparable occurred in Austria and Germany at that time. In any case, however, the result of the crusade to make the world safe for democracy was less liberal than what had existed before, and the Versailles Peace Dictate precipitated, as we all know, World War II. Not only did state power grow faster after World War I, after the democratization taking place, than before, in particular, the treatment of minorities deteriorated in the democratized post-World War I period. In the newly founded Czechoslovakia, for instance, the Germans were systematically mistreated until they were finally expelled by the millions and butchered by the tens of thousands after World War II by the majority Czechs. And nothing remotely comparable had happened to the Czechs during the Habsburg reign, for instance. And the situation regarding the relations between Germans and South Slavs in pre-war Austria versus post-war Yugoslavia was quite similar. Democracy then, and this is something that Mises recognized in his 1919 book on nation, economy, and state, democracy does not work in multi-ethnic societies. It does not create peace there, but promotes conflict and has potentially genocidal tendencies. Fourth point, the democratic peace theorists claim that democracy is a stable equilibrium. This has been stated most clearly by Francis Fukuyama, who labeled the new democratic world order as the end of history. However, evidence exists that this claim is patently wrong on purely theoretical grounds. Now, how can democracy be at equilibrium if it is possible that democracy can be transformed democratically into a dictatorship? That is, a system which is considered to be not stable. The answer is that makes, of course, no sense whatsoever. In addition, empirically, democracies are anything but stable. As indicated before, in multicultural societies, democracy regularly leads to the oppression or even expulsion and extermination of minorities. That seems to be hardly a peaceful equilibrium. And in homogeneous societies, democracy regularly leads to class warfare, which leads to economic crises, which leads to dictatorship. Think, for example, of post-Tsarist Russia, or think of post-World War I Italy, or of Weimar Germany, or of Spain or Portugal in more recent times, Greece, Turkey, Guatemala, Argentina, Chile, and Pakistan. Not only is this correlation between democracy and dictatorship troublesome for democratic peace theorists, worse, they must face the fact that the dictatorships emerging from crises of democracy are not always worse from a libertarian point of view than what would have resulted otherwise. Cases can be cited where dictatorships were preferable. Think of Italy and Mussolini. Definitely preferable for having a democratically established communist Italy, or Spain and Franco. In addition, how is one to square the advocacy of democracy with the fact that dictators, quite unlike kings, who owe their rank to an accident of birth, are often favorites of the masses, and in this sense highly democratic? Just think of Lenin and Stalin, who were certainly more democratic than Tsar Nicholas II, or think of Hitler, who was definitely more democratic than Kaiser Wilhelm or Franz Joseph. Now, according to the democratic peace theorists, then, it would seem that we are supposed to war against foreign dictators, whether kings or demagogues, in order to install democracies, which then turn into modern dictatorships, until finally, one supposes, the United States itself has turned into a dictatorship owing to the growth of the internal state power, which results from endless emergencies engendered by foreign wars. Now, better, I dare say, to heed the advice of Erich von Kühnelt-Ledin, and instead of aiming to make the world safe for democracy, we try making it safe from democracy everywhere, but most importantly, of course, in the United States. Now, after this excursion into the theory of democratic peace, I'm back to the proposition that there is no greater threat to lasting peace than the democratic state, and in particular the United States. And the question thus is how to defend oneself against the United States.